You know, it's kind of funny that when you go on Twitter, on the left-hand side at the bottom or near the middle of the left-hand side of Twitter, there's always different names or events that are hashtagging, are trending. They're basically in the top, this is basically the top 10, if you will, of people, events, whatever, that are trending, and Twitter keeps track of them that way. Well, the other day, one name appeared on there that got people wondering, why is this person trending? And that was Ken Penders. Ken Penders came on to Twitter and basically around this past weekend or before answered a question. I guess he was doing a Q&A. And some fan asked him, I guess, what stories or moments he regrets not writing or talking about or illustrating, or more so along the lines writing, for the Sonic comic book when it was under Archie Comics. Well, the answer he got his name trending. He got his name in the top 10, top 15 Twitter trends. And you know why that was? You know what it was that he said, the answer he gave that got him trending on Twitter? Well, long story short, back during the mid portion of the comic, or should I say, during the, basically, during the early days of the comic, and I'm not talking really, really early. No, I'm talking more along the lines of when it started to get more dramatic, dark, and serious. This would be around the issue 30s, 40s, and 50s. Well, it was during this time, during some of these issues, that Ken Penders was the head writer. Endgame was his quote-unquote masterpiece, his grandiose experiment. Well, I don't know if this is around the time he was planning to do it or afterwards. But Ken Penders' answer to the question, obviously the fan asked him, about possibly what he regretted. Now, I'm not sure because I don't see the question being asked, but we do see the answer. And basically, Ken Penders said that if he had an opportunity, if he would have had the opportunity, I should say, and you can check this up on Twitter, you can even Google it, but basically Ken Penders admitted that if he could have had the chance to do so, he would have wrote, maybe even illustrated, but probably wrote mostly, a scene where Sally Acorn loses her virginity to Jeffrey St. John. Yeah, take that in for a moment. Take that in. Now, what's funny about this is I always hear people complain about Spike and Rarity should not being together in MLP, and that it's wrong. Here's the one thing about Spike and Rarity. Even if they decided to put those two together, which I hope they do, there is no way neither of the writers on the show or on the comic book based on the show would even attempt doing something like that. No way. The only ones that would be daring enough to do that is the freelance writers and artists that do art and web comics for the adult material, or the adult material based on these kind of franchises. But we're talking an official publication. We're talking about a franchise and a character that was a major part of the franchise and a major part of the story in the comic. We're talking about basically one of the former head writers coming out and saying that if they had the chance, they would have had Sally Acorn have sex with Jeffrey St. John, and she would have lost her virginity because of it. Look, people have a right to their opinions. Now, Ken Penders has come out and defended this argument. Actually, in a sense, he's starting to have what looks like to be a laugh at the fact that a lot of people are basically pissing and moaning at the fact of fictional characters getting it on. He's even part of his defense is he has said that Laura, that's Lara dash Sue, S-U, has already had sex at the age of 16. He's even defending it by saying states allow women, if not kids, as young as 14, to get married. And recently, I read on his Twitter that he's, like I say, it sounded like he's having a laugh out of this. Well, Ken, you put yourself in this position where people are not too happy. They're not too thrilled with this. You see, Ken, it's one thing when the comic book publisher that publishes the comic that you love, that you subscribe to, that you read and review every day or every time you get an issue. It's one thing for them to have that taken away from them and then given to someone like IDW who doesn't even keep the comic, the original story arc of the comic going, instead decides to try to reboot it and go a different direction. It's one thing to basically can go and do that. But it's another, and now it's another as well for a former writer or former staff member, writer sometimes, comic books, animated series, live action series, movies, you name it. It's one thing, or it's another thing for the former writer to come out and admit to the world what plans they had in store had they stayed on board. They admit, former writers sometimes even in pro wrestling, when they write a story, and either work with the athlete or the performer to see if it's good with them, and maybe allow the performer to throw their 2 cents in. Sometimes that former writer will come out and shoot interviews and mention what they really wanted to do or what was originally supposed to be the plan. Heck, Ian Flynn has basically admitted that had Sega basically not stuck their nose in his business, along with Archie Comics and Capcom, that basically he had a lot more planned for his original plan for the Mecha Sally arc would have been different. Heck, Ian Flynn even says that if this whole lawsuit behind the scenes hadn't occurred, that they would have gone in a different direction. There's certain key characters that got taken out because of the lawsuit would have played an important role. and the outcome in general would have been different. Now, with that said, it's, like I said, it's one thing when fans basically are upset at the fact that the comic is canceled and then picked up by another publisher, and instead of, like I said, continuing the story as is, they reboot it. And as I just said, it's another for a former writer of any kind to talk about what they would have done originally had they stayed on board. But it's another to come out and say that if they had stayed on board, if they were given the opportunity, that one of the stories they would have gone for is have a character or have certain characters lose their virginity to each other. Look, despite how you feel about Ken Penders, despite how you feel about Ian Flynn, Carl Bowlers, they are very talented writers, you have to agree. And there is a side of them, just like the rest of us, that feels that if they have the opportunity to do something, if they would have been given the shot, given the chance to do something, they would have. And even after things are said and done, and it's all in the past, it's natural, if you will, to kind of it's natural that when you do a Q&A or you do an interview, a shoot interview or whatever, and you get asked the question of what you wish you could have done had you stayed on board, or what you regret not doing or writing when you stayed on board, it's only natural that you'll come out and say that you regret doing this thing, or you regret going with this, or you regret doing that. And I think what Ken Penders was trying to get at was if he had had the opportunity to do so, even if it was a one-time deal, he wanted to basically mature the comic. He wanted to basically take the comic, when it was under the Archie comic license, even at that, and he wanted to excel it to another level. He sees the maturity that DC and Marvel and Dark Horse and IDW even, and Image all contend with, or all utilize, even back then. And he pretty much admits that basically if he had been given the chance, he would have taken this one moment, made it a reality, and thus would have helped elevate this comic to another level to attract more readers, more mature, adult, or older readers. Because at the time, folks, the stories were getting a little bit more darker and mature, but they were still for all ages. But here's the thing. Here's what's got people up in arms. And like I said, you could Google this. You can go on Twitter and type in his name in the search bar. Here's what's got people up in arms. That basically he's proposing the idea to have a character that's in her mid-teens, 2 years away from being an adult legally in reality. here he comes out and says that that if he had the opportunity, that if he would have been given the opportunity, he would have basically gone through and written a scene, maybe illustrated a scene, where Sally and Jeffrey St. John had sex and she lost her virginity. Now, I understand maybe doing something like this is to create more drama between Jeffrey, Sonic, and Sally, and make the rivalry between Sonic and Jeffrey that more intense and important. But all it does in the end is already, in the eyes of the viewers, the fans, the readers, take an already despicable character in their eyes, or douchebag of a character, and make him even worse. That's what it would have done. I mean, fans already didn't like him when they first saw him, and Ken teased this sexual tension or attraction between the two. And on top of that, later on, it didn't help that Ian Flynn exposed the character to be a student, a protege of Axis Nagus. But if Ken Penders would have done this before that revelation was made by Ian Flynn, then if you think Jeffrey St. John got hated on when it was revealed that he was on the side of Nagus the whole time, then if Ken Penders would have pulled this out, would have achieved this, that hatred would have been quadrupled. You could probably tell by now that I'm doing this on the fly and I'm just shooting from the hip. But guys, let's face it. We all are entitled to free speech. We're all entitled to express how we feel. And we may not agree with what each other says. But if we put ourselves in the shoes of someone that used to work within the comic book industry, the movie industry, or the wrestling industry, they used to write stories, used to be one of the main people in charge, one of the top sought-after script writers, or whatever you want to put it, and we have an opportunity to come out and express and even answer the questions of what we would have done if we had given the chance, or what we regret not doing if we were under the license or under the freelancing or the work of a publisher or a studio. We have to put ourselves in the shoes of those that basically have the opportunity to sit down and talk about this and express what they would have done. Now, do I agree in the end with the idea of that happening? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. But I will say this. We may not agree with it, but there is tons of people out there that write adult stories featuring these kind of characters every day. There are people out there that draw web comics based on the adult web comics of these characters doing the thing, if you know what I mean, every day. But I get why people are upset. Because Ken Penders is insinuating that he would have done this while he was still working on the comic under the Archie license. So, I don't know what other more to say. All I'm going to say, guys, is check out Twitter, check out Google, and you'll see, type up his name and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. So, that's all I'm going to say. Let me know what you all think down below about this, and I'll talk to you all later.